Hello everybody and welcome to this revision video on Within Her Eyes. This video is solely focusing on section 1, which is the prologue, and that I've put the time signatures up there for you. It goes from 0, so right at the beginning, until 50 seconds in. So what you will need with you. So I highly recommend that you have your Within Her Eyes booklet. This may be half completed, this might be fully completed. Super essential that you have it with you so you can add any detail into it. You also will need your Arts Pool revision guide to have with you. Again, that's going to help you along the way and to add extra detail. Okay, so what this video includes, I will be going through the choreographic content in Within Her Eyes. So it's really essential that you understand all of these terms to be able to carry on. So in terms of movement content, so that is actually what the dance is. So you will be able to describe a movement example, including detail in the actions, the dynamics, the space, and the relationships. You will also need to know about the structuring devices and form of Within Her Eyes, which I will go through. And you will also need to understand how the choreographer has manipulated and changed the choreographic content through choreographic devices. After I have gone through choreographic content, we are going to go through the features of production, which I've listed here for you. So we're going to talk about the setting or the staging. We're going to talk about the lighting, any props or properties, the costume, the number of dancers, the aural setting, and of course Within Her Eyes we're going to talk about the use of camera. So let's get started. We're going to talk about now choreographic content. So firstly, I want to go through the overall structure of the piece. So it is a prologue followed by 6 continuous sections defined by changing locations, physicality and music that reflects the developing relationship. The overall effect is one seamless journey. Within Her Eyes uses a narrative structure, so a dance that tells a story. So the prologue, which is what this video is about, and there's the time signature next to it. Then the next section that we study is the beginning. Moving closer, which is the third section, however, we don't study that section. Then we look at flow 1, we do have a focus on that section. Then kneeling, then flow 2, which again is another section that we study, and ending with floor. Of course, we always want to know about the whole piece, so we can get an overall vision. However, we are focusing on 4 sections, and I've put the timings there as well, so you can easily find this when you go to watch Within Her Eyes. Okay, so let's get started on the choreographic content. So remember, this is the prologue section. So there is only one dancer in the prologue section, therefore no relationships are used, because as we know, to have a relationship in dance you need more than one dancer. So for this prologue section you won't need to write about relationships. Really important that you use visualization to try and imagine the section. When you're in the exam, that's really going to help you. So watching Within Her Eyes as many times as possible so that you can visualize what the prologue is, and that will help you answer the questions. So let's start with movement examples, choreographic content. So actions, the female dancer walking through the streets. Dancer performs small gestures such as running her hand through her hair. The dancer has her arms wrapped around herself while she's walking. And what this contributes to is it highlights the female dancer from the very beginning. She is the only one we see, and it's highlighting her. So in terms of dynamics, there's soft hand gestures. So when she runs her hands through her hair, it's of a soft dynamic. When she's walking through the deserted streets, and then we also see her walking through the graveyard, it is a slow and a smooth walk. This adds to the piece as the female dancer is acting distressed to show the loss, and we can see that when she is wrapping her arms around her, putting her hand through her hair, walking slowly, being quite small in her position. So she is already telling us that she is distressed at this point. In terms of the space, she is walking continuously in a straight pathway, and she is standing up walking, so she doesn't really change her level. But what's interesting is her gestures are very small, so her size of movement is small. So that highlights to us that she's maybe a bit vulnerable. And obviously she's on her own, she's the only dancer in this section, so she is alone. Okay, in terms of choreographic devices, so one choreographic device used here, so we have repetition. So the female dancer repeats the walking in different locations. The female dancer walks through the empty streets, then the empty streets again, and then in the graveyard. So remember that this is a dance for camera, so the shots of her change. So she's walking through an empty street and it's a scene, and then it changes and she's in a different empty street, and then she's walking again in the graveyard, all whilst we only see her from the back. So I've added that picture there just to remind you that we never see the front of her or her face, we're just viewing her from behind. And how this contributes, this repetition of walking, is that it builds her pedestrian everyday character. So an everyday thing to do is to walk, so it lets us know that she's just an everyday character. It also introduces the character as a lonely figure. I mean, you can see in that picture how her head is slightly down. That repeating of the walking could suggest that she's on her own a lot, therefore she's a lonely figure. Her small and slow actions and closed body language suggest that she feels sad and helpless. So that's another way that the movement can contribute. It's adding to her overall character. Okay, let's start with production features. So the aural setting in this section. So it is an ominous soundscape, very subtle and electronic in sound, and it builds in intensity and it builds in volume. Again, this will help you if you've seen the section multiple times to really just shut your eyes and hear that music in your head, and that will allow you to describe the music better. So how this contributes to it adds to the idea of being alone and in a deserted place. So there's no real melody, there's no real warming music here, there's not a song, it's electronic in sound, kind of these drone sounds that are drawn out. And it's quite subtle, which again highlights that she is in a deserted place and maybe alone. And the fact that it builds in intensity creates a kind of tension that enhances a somber and lonely atmosphere. The aural setting also supports the structure because each time the section changes, so does the aural setting. Okay, in terms of staging or set design, as we know, this is a site-sensitive work, meaning that it's in a non-traditional performance environment. We can see that she's in various different locations. She's in a deserted street, and then she's in a graveyard. So different locations used. So in terms of describing this, using colours is really good, using objects of what you see, but we can also take in a bit of to account the kind of weather around. So it's an overcast sky, you do see drizzles of rain when she's walking through the graveyard, and it's grey and it's white and it's black. But again, describing the set in the prologue, we see her in a deserted street and then we see her in a graveyard. So how does this contribute to the overall piece? So the empty streets again gives a sense of isolation. We don't see anybody else, so that's quite haunting, that's quite worrying that she's isolated. Obviously seeing that graveyard moment, which is the bottom left picture, that clearly suggests that she has lost someone, maybe she's visiting a grave, so it already gives us that inkling that she's lost someone close to her. And the overcast sky and rain creates a bleak, sad overall somber atmosphere. Okay, in terms of use of dancers, so how is the dancer used? So the female dancer is the only dancer seen in this section. So remember that Within Her Eyes is a duet. So interesting that the whole section only focuses on the female dancer. We don't see the male dancer in this section. So she is alone and is only recorded from behind. So we'll go on to that camera shot in a minute, but that is also connected with the use as dancer as well. So how this contributes. Starts with only seeing the female dancer to support the idea that she is alone and isolated and vulnerable. Every production feature now is linking to the fact that, reinforcing that she is alone, isolated and possibly vulnerable. The camera follows her from behind like we are not meant to be there, so it kind of makes us feel like we're intruding on what she is doing. Okay, in terms of use of camera, again linking to use of dancers as well, we can see that a close and mid-range shots are used. So close up, we can really see almost the detail in her hair, and then slightly further back where we can see from her kind of waist upwards, half of her body. The female dancer is filmed from behind using a follow shot on a handheld camera. So the handheld camera is used and it's following the dancer from behind. So how this contributes, this introduces her character as a protagonist and highlights her isolation and loneliness. This creates mystery as the viewer. We can't see her face or we can't see the front of her, so we almost feel like, where is she going? What is she doing? We are behind her, we are following her, and that's what the camera does for us. That's what it suggests. Okay, so looking at the lighting, obviously lighting is very different in Within Her Eyes. It's very different to how you might describe lighting in other works. Alina Curver, for example, you might be describing the spotlights, the side lights, the washes. Obviously, she's outdoors in a site-sensitive work, so it's natural lighting from the sun. But in the prologue, remember it flashes to that stormy lighting and then flashes back to the dancer in a location, and it's dull and dreary, overcast, but it really creates an intense atmosphere. The rain and the daylight at the beginning creates a somber atmosphere which enhances her overall isolation. Okay, costume. So female dancer is the only one we see. I've tried to zoom in as much as I can on her costume there. So in this section, the female dancer wears a cream/beige woolen jumper. So we can see that in the picture there. And she has a low ponytail, so hair is up but in a low ponytail, and all of what she's wearing is in a light colour, so we can't quite see what's on the bottom there. In the next section, we know what she's wearing because we see it more. So that is a basic description of her costume. So what this suggests, so this makes the costume seem more naturalistic. So it is a plain woolen jumper, fitting in with her surroundings. It's not a wacky bright red jumper. She's matching kind of the colour palette. This adds to the sense that she's cold, obviously suggesting if she has a jumper on, she's layering up, so suggesting that she's cold. And the neutral colours reinforce her pedestrian character. So these are clothes that anyone could wear, a woolen jumper, so reinforcing the fact that she is simply a pedestrian character.